Joining us now from outside of Delaney Hall right now is Ali Velshi, host of Velshi, of course, here on MS Now. Ali, what is the scene like where you are? What are you hearing from protesters? We know there have been counter demonstrators and also Trump supporters showing up today.
Yeah, there are lots, actually. It's all of the above. It's probably a little hotter than it was at this point yesterday, but as you know, things got pretty escalated last night. I'll set the scene for you. That's the Delaney Detention Center. It's an ICE detention center. It's a federal detention center. You can see it behind all of this razor wire. It's basically a warehouse. The issue is any federal detention center should be open to any member of Congress without any notice to be able to inspect the situation inside. Members of Congress and state officials in New Jersey have had great difficulty gaining access to the situation in there. Organizations like the ACLU and others suggest that the living standards inside are substandard, the housing standards, the medical standards, and the food are all substandard. So you have a number of protesters here, and what has happened is in order to keep the protesters separate from the ICE and CBP people, ICE and CBP are on the other side of that fence, and then you'll see a long line of police, about 8 or 9 deep. These are not the state police. These are not ICE and CBP. These are actually Newark and Bellevue, New Jersey police. The state police were deployed by Mikey Sherrill, as you just heard. The idea was to keep the two groups separated and stop the tension between them. Didn't work last night. Tension elevated between protesters and police. Now, right now, what I'm largely seeing is a group of protesters. The larger group of protesters are, this is the anti-ICE protest. There are a smaller group of people who are pro-Trump and pro-ICE. They're getting into discussions. There are a lot of ideological discussions happening right now. Nothing that feels like the sort of tension that becomes violent. There are arguments and discussions taking place. But at the moment, there's about 6 to 10 feet and a barrier, a physical metal barrier between the protesters who are on this side and the police whom you can see on that side. And for now, things are looking pretty quiet. But there are allegations of mistreatment inside there, of bad living conditions, bad food. There are reports that there are some of the detainees are withholding, are not eating food. Some have described it as a hunger strike. A lot of politicians would like to confirm this, but they're having trouble doing so. There have been federal politicians who have tried to get in here. Adriano Espaillat got a court order to get admission. There's no reason why one should actually have a court order to get into a federal detention center. That is a permission that is granted to member of Congress. So that's what we're looking at right now. About this time yesterday, it was probably a little quieter than it is, so it's unclear as to what happens. As often happens in protests, they get a little bit hotter after night. There are, as I say, municipal police right over here, not the state police who we saw last night in there, but you can just see if you look up and down, there are different groups of police. We have seen state police in the neighborhood, and at the moment, there's a status quo here. It's a quiet, peaceful protest with some interesting arguments going on between some of the people on either side of it.
Ali Velshi, thank you for that live report. You mentioned Congress people gaining access, or at least Congress people supposed to be gaining access. We have Democratic Congressman of New Jersey here at the desk, Rob Menendez. Congressman, you've been out there with protesters this week. What are you hearing from them, the families of detainees? What are their demands?
Well, they're concerned about their loved ones inside, right? And inside, you have mothers and fathers of U.S. citizen children. You had one of the people who was a family member who was protesting outside was a 10-year-old daughter of someone inside, right? One of my constituents is a 4-month, she's pregnant, 4 months, 4-month pregnancy, and her husband's inside, and they have 2 children, and she's worried about him, right? So these are the people who are outside advocating for their loved ones inside. You've heard about the conditions. Those conditions are a reality, despite whatever the administration says or wants to spin, and that's what we're trying to raise awareness about.
We'll talk about those conditions, because you actually spent quite a lot of time in the waiting room overnight last week trying to get to your constituent, Martin Soto, who led the hunger strike. And tell us about what you witnessed.
Yeah, so I mean, ICE is true. ICE does not want us in there, because when we go in there and we can tell the American people about what's happening, you're going to see a further erosion of support for what the president, Stephen Miller, and this administration are doing. Inside, you see pregnant women who aren't getting adequate health care. There is a woman who suffered a miscarriage. The medical staff there said it was a psychological pregnancy. You have a man in a wheelchair who's been kept in medical isolation for 4 months. You're not supposed to be there longer than a single month. These are the types of things happening in addition to the lack of sanitary conditions in the bathrooms. Someone slipped and fell, hit his head. It took 45 minutes for medical professionals to show up. It is a awful place, and our government is spending $1 billion to keep people there that have no criminal records.
So in addition to you're actually getting access to some of this, there have been times, it sounds like, where they've kind of played games with you and kept you from accessing the constituents you were there to see. You were telling us during the break about how you went to see one of your constituents recently. Tell our audience what happened.
Yeah, so that individual, Martin Soto, his wife, who's 4 months pregnant, they had tried to remove him from the facility, and they didn't know where they were going to take him, and they were concerned about it. They ultimately didn't that afternoon. I showed up that evening to do an unannounced oversight visit, as we have a legal right to do, and I told his wife, Gabriella, that I was not going to leave until I could confirm that Martin was okay. I went in about 8 o'clock. At 10 o'clock, after constant communication, I said they were not going to let me in, and I told them that's a problem because I'm not leaving. So I stayed there overnight. Eventually, the next morning at 11:30, me and a couple of other colleagues were allowed in. The first thing that ICE says to me, after having been there for 15 hours, Martin Soto's not here. They moved him at 2 a.m. in the morning. And they knew that that's who I was there to see. They knew that he was one of the people who was leading efforts inside to go on this hunger strike, to go on this labor strike because of the conditions there and because they really want their stories to be told to the American people. I've made that commitment to them. I'll continue to share what I can with everyone.
Were you ever able to meet with him?
So I had to go to a different facility in New Jersey, in Elizabeth, where he had been transferred to, and was eventually able to see him there later that day, about 18 hours after I first showed up in Newark.
I just want to spell out the obvious, though, which is that a hunger strike is indicating that people are desperate to draw attention to something that I think has sort of receded in the national imagination, let's say, as people are not able to really see inside. How do you shut a facility like this down? Yeah. What does that take?
It takes the government being somewhat responsive to the inhumane conditions that exist on a daily basis. I think the overwhelming majority of Americans would say you should not have pregnant women inside that facility. You should not have the elderly inside that facility. You should not have people who are medically vulnerable inside that facility. You should not have an 18-year-old who's going to miss her high school graduation next month because she's in that facility. That's the reality, and that's why we have to keep telling these stories. And yes, the administration wants to spin it. The administration wants to focus on what's happening outside Delaney Hall because they don't want us talking about what's happening inside Delaney Hall. I will never stop talking about what's happening inside Delaney Hall because it's a stain on our country, and we need more people to speak out against it.
Let's go back to, you mentioned that there should be a set, firm deadline for a detainee, an individual, to be held at Delaney Hall. And that's around 30 days. But individuals are being kept there for, you mentioned a constituent, 4 months. Yeah. How can they legally justify doing that? And also, doesn't that just further the contractor's bottom line because they are getting paid for every day that they are keeping the person incarcerated? Yeah, the only people celebrating what's happening in our country are the GEO Group and CoreCivic, two publicly traded companies who are the two largest private operators of these facilities. Absolutely, this is a problem. I mean, they are delaying court dates. People that have favorable court hearings are still not being released. On Tuesday of this week, one judge had to hear 74 cases. That's not due process. That's not fairness in our country. And people are increasingly frustrated with the fact that they can't have their cases heard because most of these people are being picked up at routine ICE check-ins. Yes, our immigration system is broken. They are trying to navigate it the way we were asking them to. And what happens? They're being picked up there or at court hearings outside the facility. That's what's happening. And they're being brought in. So overwhelmingly, the thing that they share with us is, why are we here? I have my kids back home, mothers who miss Mother's Day, someone who missed their son's 21st birthday. That's the story of the people who are in there. And they just don't understand why their country that they love, they may not have been born here, but they love this country. They're raising their families here. They've started small business here. They're wondering why the country they love is doing this to them. And I think that's a fair question for all of us to be asking. So what should they be doing? They follow the instructions that courts give them, that our immigration services give them, which is to show up for your hearings. They do that, and they're punished. Presumably, if they stay in the shadows and they disregard those orders to show up at hearings, they're also punished.
what options are there for immigrants who are here, who maybe don't have authorization, or they're working on getting their legal status, temporary or otherwise. What options do they actually have at this point, given the way our system is functioning or not functioning?
It's a series of impossible choices. None of them are easy, and many of them do have counsel, and a lot of those lawyers are trying to give them the best advice in this really difficult moment. What we need to do as a country is say this should not be how we operate. This should not be how we enforce our immigration laws. We can have comprehensive immigration reform. We desperately need it. That's what these families desperately need, and it would cure this national nightmare that we've had for so long. That should be the conversation that we are having, but we first need to acknowledge what is happening in this broken system. We see an administration that is exploiting it at the expense of families and children who are being separated. If we can acknowledge that, then I think we can begin the work of saying, how do we fix this national nightmare? How do we give people a sense of protection in this country when they've given so much to our communities? That's where the conversation needs to go, but right now we need to navigate out of this nightmare.
Congressman Robert Menendez, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you all.